This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
I'm in a bad mood. No, I'm just kidding. You know, it's not too often I start these podcasts with serious topics, but, I think if there was ever a show to just do a blanket cold open and talk about a couple recent news bulletins, this would be the show to do it. It's not normally the formula of the Monday podcast, but one of these stories in particular just really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And especially from a guy that I had a modicum of respect for. I don't know how much of that has changed since hearing about everything that went down over the weekend with the AEW Final Battle media call, if you can even call it that. Before I dive into that whole story, I did want to take a minute to just send out my well wishes to Barry Windham. We literally just got done covering his debut in Crockett Promotions when we were doing our retro review series on Friday. At the time I recorded that, I had no idea that everything had gone down. So it was very peculiar timing to begin with, but I wanted to quickly address it since we're going to be talking about a lot of Barry Windham's run in the NWA going forward. Obviously it's a tough situation. I had seen Bray's little out of kayfabe video he did. I think it was on Instagram, basically talking about the situation, giving everybody a little bit of a health update, and I think he plugged a GoFundMe that had been put out for Barry. It was a nice little tribute. You could tell Bray was very choked up about it, but I liked it. We obviously wish him a speedy recovery, and, I guess the best thing you can say about it is thank God there are still great civilians out there that are willing to step up and help out in times of need. Really, who knows what would have happened if that guy had not been able to provide CPR to Barry in the airport in Atlanta before the medical team arrived. It's one of those things where you can view it as a luck of the draw or an act of divine intervention. Either way, it probably accounted for why Bray wasn't on SmackDown this past weekend. And that was definitely understandable. But like I said, I wish the Windham and Rotunda family all the best. I know Barry's starting to get up there in age, but God, even 62 is still pretty young to be suffering severe heart attacks like that. I know he probably hasn't been in the best physical shape with being out of the ring all those years, but still, it always sucks when you hear about a lot of your childhood faves undergoing health complications. Barry Windham was always somebody that I admired watching growing up. Wasn't someone I would necessarily consider one of my all-time favorites, but, I always knew how gifted he was in the ring as an athlete, especially for a guy that size. And I'm going to be really looking forward to covering his work on the studio shows heading into 87 and beyond, obviously as part of our retro review series. But the other thing I wanted to quickly address here was all the fallout from the stuff that happened over the weekend during this AEW Final Battle media call. This happened before the Final Battle pay-per-view on Saturday, which again, I did not watch for the record. And tell you the truth, the whole thing ended up becoming about everything but the Final Battle show. Instead, it ended up kind of spiraling into this semi-awkward roundtable discussion where Tony Khan kind of started talking about family issues and a little bit of the resolution to the William Regal story. And I had listened to some of this in my free time because I heard what this whole thing ended up turning into by the end. And it caught my attention because When it became apparent that the Regal departure had close ties with all the stuff that was going on with Tony's personal life, the first thing that came to my mind was, boy, that sounds fucking manipulative. Little did I know what I was in for. And look, I'm not going to spend the next hour trying to dissect this whole thing. I know Jim Cornette and Brian Last did so on their drive-through show over the weekend, and even in that domain, I personally don't think they did a good enough job taking William Regal to the woodshed for this crap. Basically, the long and short of it is that Tony Khan's mother had been dealing with a series of strokes, and a lot of this was pretty much happening right around the time where the rumors started circulating that Regal was looking for an outing from his contract with AEW so he could go back to the WWE. And we've already covered that whole Regal saga, so I'm not going to try and do another deep dive into that thing. But the real part of the media call that stood out to me was when Tony was mentioning the night he was having the phone conversation with Regal outside the hospital while his mom was in intensive care. And the whole thing basically turned into Regal giving this bullshit sob story about how his son is currently working in NXT, and Regal's been looking to go there and work with him and help him train. And I mean, he basically turned the whole thing into this manipulative sideways pitch to where he was able to somehow convince Tony that Regal being with his son is more important than his commitment to his contractual obligations with AEW, and that Tony should be able to see it his way since he's also dealing with family problems right now. And I mean, beyond the fact that it's just Regal plainly manipulating Tony Khan and not even trying to mask it, the fact that Regal chose that moment in that specific time to try and dump all these problems onto Tony and make it all about him. Seriously, who does that shit? Look, I can say a lot about Tony Khan. I have. And this entire situation sucks. I can sit here and talk about how terrible of a booker Tony is and how wretched his TV product is on a week-to-week basis. But, you know, hearing about his mother having serious health complications and that it's been a difficult period in his life to be going through, look, man, I get it. And it's a tough, tough thing to go through in your life. Probably one of the more difficult things you'll ever experience. But the fact that William Regal would do something as scummy and slimeballish like that to try and make this all about him when Tony's going through a real period of struggle in his life, you know what I have to say to William Regal for that? Fuck you, William Regal. Goddamn piece of shit. Who the hell are you to take advantage of somebody like that when you knew what you were doing? And from all the people out there listening, don't even try to spin the story in the other direction. Regal knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly how to twist the narrative to ensure that Tony would get him out of his deal. To see it his way. And, you know, whether Tony Khan was stupid enough to do that or if he just probably didn't want to deal with all of that at the moment, I don't know. But you know what? If that's where Regal's head was at, to where instead of trying to maybe stick by Tony's side, he basically used him as a tool to make it all about him and get out of his deal because he wanted to be happy, good riddance to him. You know, I've had a lot of good things to say about William Regal in the past, but that was a lowball move. And anybody with half a brain knows that. Regal knew exactly what he was doing, and he played Tony like a fool. And again, that's partially to blame Tony for just being a spineless, weak beta male. I've said that a million times before. The guy's just a gutless coward. Yeah, but William Regal also deserves half the blame for being a manipulative prick. It can go both ways. So you know what? If that's the kind of attitude Regal had toward his fellow employees in AEW, including his own boss that he worked for about 6 months or whatever, then he can go piss right off. You know, I'm not one to react emotionally in circumstances like that, but when you're using somebody's family crisis as a scheme to try and weasel your way out of a commitment to a company, I have no sympathy for you. That's just a dick move, plain and simple. I can't defend that. You know, especially when the rumors are that Regal basically had buyer's remorse as soon as he signed the contract anyway. Come on. If you weren't sure what you were getting into, then you shouldn't have signed the fucking contract. You had 3 years of history to know what kind of freak show you were jumping into when you put that pen to paper, Regal. That's just irresponsible. And again, it was stupid on Tony's part to even allow for that potential contract buyout to be put in there to begin with. Tony should have said, nah, dude, you signed the deal. You don't like it? Tough nuts. You're sticking with me for at least another 6 months to a year. I'm going to milk you for what you're worth. I just can't get over this whole thing. That's one of the lowest things I've seen in wrestling all year. And coming from a guy like William Regal, who I always respected and thought better of, I don't even know what to think anymore. And again, I'll say this before we dive into the wrestling talk. We can definitely have the conversation on whether or not Tony should have been airing this stuff to the public to begin with. Especially during a press conference that was supposed to center around a pay-per-view that was happening over the weekend. Wrong place, wrong time to do it. I get it. But can we also try to analyze how fucking sleazy that move was from Regal? Again, the guy had a motive. Don't think for a second Regal didn't think twice about this before he engaged in that phone call with Tony. I don't buy for a minute that Regal didn't know what he was doing. And maybe I'm overreacting to it. It's possible. But as someone who's been through family issues, as someone that's dealt with people trying to take advantage of personal friends and family over petty shit, this story really hit home in a lot of ways. If I actually thought that Regal had any kind of sympathy for Tony's situation, maybe I would see it differently. But the timing of this, how everything panned out in the end, I don't buy it. That was a scumball move, and nobody deserves to be taken advantage of like that. Even guys with no backbone. It's like kicking a guy while he's down and then pissing in his mouth. But again, feel free to share what you thought of it. Meanwhile, we can talk about some wrestling because, I kind of want to get off this topic before I punch a hole in my fucking wall. All right. What do we got? Aside from a Bobby Heenan-less episode of Monday Night Raw, I'm trying desperately not to sulk over that. God, is it going to be hard. I will admit, and while the idea of Vince McMahon making fun of that little incident from last week made me want to punt him right in the balls, Bobby Heenan being replaced with Jim Cornette as the color guy, it's not a bad trade. Corny's definitely not the brain when it comes to delivering all-time one-liners, but he's got a witty sense of humor. And the humor began right out of the gate as the caption for his name on screen read, James E. Cornette. Got to make it a formal delivery. But in addition to Corny being back on WWF television, guess who else was back in action? The Macho Man Randy Savage. After all that's gone down between him and Crush in recent weeks, the loose cannon has been released back onto Raw to compete. And what a return it was, taking on Fatu of the Head Shrinkers. And if you are a fan of watching two pissed-off wild juggernauts going at it, boy, do I have the match for you. What do you get when you pair a crazy, out-of-his-mind Macho Man with a wild Samoan? You get this match. And it was awesome. Basically, all you have to do in your mind is picture Fatu no-selling about everything in the book and Macho Man bumping around like a machine for about 10 minutes. That was this match in a nutshell. Tie that in with some of Cornette's entertaining commentary, wherein at one point he tried to get us all to picture what Alpha would look like in a three-piece suit at a board meeting trying to negotiate contracts. To which I began picturing exactly that in my mind, and for some reason I could not help but also imagine Alpha with a big old cigar hanging out of his mouth. I have no idea where he came up with that line, but I'm glad he thought of it, because it gave me a laugh. And it kind of sucks going back and watching this match and thinking, they're doing this match between Fatu and the Macho Man to build up excitement for the eventual showdown between Crush and the Macho Man. You know what I really wanted to see instead? More matches with Fatu and the Macho Man. Fatu took literally 90% of the match. He just beat and beat and beat and beat the fuck out of Savage from bell to bell. And with about 1 minute left in the match, Savage made this great fiery comeback, did a giant double axe from the top rope out to the floor, threw Fatu back into the ring, hit him with a big lariat, and then he won with the Macho Man elbow drop. And after it was over, I was sad to know that we would not be getting a best of 37 series between these men. But there were a lot of programs in WWE that we wanted to see over the years and unfortunately never got to. This would rank among them. On the subject of guys I wanted to see more of in the WWF, you know who was not one of those guys? Todd Pettingill. Fuck, was that guy annoying. Whiter than a jar of mayonnaise is what that Todd Pettingill was. You know what he was? He was the kid growing up in school that tried to be the extroverted kid to fit in with all the cool kids, and all they wound up doing was hanging him by his underwear to the flagpole. They do this skit in the production truck, basically saying that he took money out of his own pocket to buy a segment of TV time for Raw so that he could rant about how President Jack Tunney is a nutcase who overreacted by suspending the Macho Man over the incident with Crush. Yes, Todd Pettingill bought a time slot on Monday Night Raw so that he could try to be an opinion journalist. Glad to know his insight was completely worthless. The only highlight in this segment was Slim, who apparently was operating some of the camera equipment at the time. Slim was definitely a badass. I enjoyed that little feature. Beyond that, though, this was a complete waste of a segment. Also, the fans could do another one of those artificial vote call-ins to see if the Macho Man would be able to host WrestleMania with, of all people, Todd Pettingill. If I were Macho Man, I'd have voted no at least half a dozen times just to ensure that I could rig the system against me. The hell would any sane, rational human being want to host WrestleMania with Todd fucking Pettingill? I ain't one of them. Also, in completely unrelated news, a message/sponsor from Lex Luger to the younglings out there. Say no to drugs. Yes, kiddos. Listen to Flexi Lexi. No to drugs. Mr. All Natural himself giving you advice to stay away from substances or performance-enhancing drugs. That's the guy I want to take my drug advice from. Also, pay no attention to WWF's ongoing legal battle with the courts and the steroid scandal. But getting off that uncomfortable subject, how about a smoking gun squash? No, seriously, how about it? Even Jim Cornette wasn't going to mask how fucking stupid that gimmick was. You could tell that even he saw right through the absurdity of the whole thing. But let's talk about something truly remarkable here. Joe Messenger's ring tights. It is not too often I call attention to the WWF job guys, because most of them are totally generic, worthless human beings. I think Joe Messenger won me over with his ring gear. The outlandishly hideous floral pants that did nothing but expose how ridiculously fat this guy was. Couldn't mask the man tits, though. Those were in plain view for the whole globe to see. So, well, first of all, the match was hideously bad. Billy and Bart Gunn, God bless him. I love Billy Gunn. He's one of my few highlights when I watch AEW most weeks, and I'll always point out, it's amazing to see the conditioning that man's kept after all these years with his body. But holy shit, this smoking guns gimmick was so lame. Death TV. And even the WWF fans knew how terrible it was. The other problem, too, is that Billy and Bart were still obviously green here, so a lot of their stuff looked horrible to begin with. Just botching spots left and right, mistiming double team moves, not being in the right place for anything. It was just bad. Like, no way to work around it. The completely random appearance of Captain Lou Albano was hilarious. Just casually hanging out at ringside. Apparently managing the smoking guns here, which I have no memory of ever happening. Am I the only one that forgot that that was ever a thing? The fact that Lou Albano had a short run in the WWF as Billy and Bart's manager as a failed mid-card tag team? Can't be the only one. Even Corny was perplexed by the whole idea of Albano working as their manager. But perhaps, as he noted, he'll be useful in giving them some guidance. You know what would have been more useful? A gimmick repackage. So at that point, they re-aired the angle from last week with Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon. Specifically, the angle where Shawn lured Razor up the aisleway toward the curtain so Kevin Nash could sucker punch him. And then Shawn gave him the two Razor's Edge finishers on the rampway. Once again, dropping him about as safely as you could possibly drop someone with a move. If the goal was to make sure that Shawn did not hurt Razor, he succeeded a little too well. This Razor's Edge he gave Hall looked like it honestly would not have hurt a toddler. And that led to this totally random Erwin R. Shyster squash, wherein the only thing worth noting was the fact that he was carrying the briefcase with Razor's gold chain inside. Again, an angle that I had no recollection of. If there was an angle that I missed on television where IRS had stolen Razor's gold chain, it went totally over my head when it happened. And for some reason, he was trying to conceal it from the camera to make sure that nobody saw it, even though everyone plainly saw it, and Vince was also drawing attention to it for the entirety of the match. So why they had IRS have to hide the gimmick from everybody, I have no clue. But I guess in the meantime, while Razor is continuing to feud with Shawn, he will also be working an interim program with IRS. Apparently a program that will be centered around a fake gold necklace. So we'll look forward to that, I guess. In the meantime, we can turn things over to marking out for The Undertaker. He wrestled a squash, and with Jim Cornette being on commentary, they were also able to advance some story headed into the Royal Rumble. It began with the announcement that due to ongoing contract tampering in the World Wrestling Federation, Mr. Fuji and Corny had accidentally signed Yokozuna and The Undertaker for the WWF Championship to a casket match, as opposed to a regular singles match. And while Yoko surely is not afraid to wrestle The Undertaker, he's, well, let's just say he's not too fond of caskets. But the match is signed, sealed, and delivered now. Ain't no backing out of that contract. And since the casket match is Taker's specialty, he's obviously going into the match with the upper hand, because the casket match is all built around mind games and intimidation. And while, yes, I will be reviewing that match when we review the 94 Royal Rumble, yes, I know, the match is historically bad because of some of the angles that took place during and after it. I promise you, hand to God, I will try to be impartial when reviewing it. Because as much as I was a big fan of Taker growing up, I understand that even he was involved with some bad shit during his career. You know, especially when it came to the booking aspect of things. But in terms of what they did here, they basically had Corny establish the mood for the program, did a great job overselling the scary environment of the casket match, try to be a Weasley manager to state that Yokozuna is not, in fact, afraid. Meanwhile, Taker winds up killing the job guy and then stuffing him into a physical body bag. Very hokey. And while I can't say there have been a lot of great casket matches that I have experienced over the years, it was an attraction match for The Undertaker. They obviously worked for the character and the gimmick for the time. If they'd have just let Taker and Yoko kind of have a regular standard casket match without all the hocus-pocus bullshit they ended up doing, probably would have been a million times better. But again, we will talk about it when we review the pay-per-view. So they followed that little deal with, I believe, our final Double J VTR before his official in-ring debut next week. And not a moment too soon, because as soon as the country music started playing and Double J was riding up in his car, God, I wanted to scream. The never-ending cycle of Jeff Jarrett vignettes that went on for eons and eons. We're finally going to get a payoff before I give myself a hernia ranting about it. If I had to experience another JEFF, JARRETT shtick after this week, God, my head was going to explode. Now, this one was essentially a recap of the previous 478 other vignettes they've done, all kind of wrapped up into one. And I'll admit, it was kind of amusing seeing how generic a lot of these vignettes were. The fact that they were able to piece all these together into like one giant montage to the point where it was always made that Jeff Jarrett was going to use the WWF to advance his singing career, and that all the talentless musician hacks are going to come crawling to Jeff and beg him to save the music industry, be it record labels, halls of fame, famous music land sites. Again, it was a stupid gimmick, but it was the kind of stupid where you go back and look at it and you just laugh at the absurdity of the whole thing, especially when they packaged all this together. And the final thing we see is Jeff getting forcibly shoved out of one of the music halls. And while he's in the elevator, they got the hidden security cam filming him. And he looks up at the camera and he goes, "That's JEFF, JARRETT." And he smiles and winks at the camera. And that was their cutaway to break. That was fucking awesome. I love that. Anyhow. And again, I've said it before about Jeff. If the version we got of him in the WWF in 93 was the only kind of Jeff Jarrett we got, and not the TNA/latter half of WCW version where he was basically rammed down everyone's throats as a main eventer, I probably would not be so bitter toward him. But, yeah, the Jeff Jarrett stain on the wrestling industry is, well, it's still there. We'll just leave it at that. Anyway. So then we went to a Rick the Model Martel squash. Complete throwaway. Here's everything I wrote down. Vince plugged upcoming television shows. Both announcers spent more time addressing the Yokozuna Undertaker title match. And the Model won with a double-leg Boston Crab. I have absolutely nothing to add. But I do have something to add about this closing to Monday Night Raw. All centered around the Owen-Bret Hart saga. They establish on WWF Superstars that Owen's got a beef to settle with his older brother. He's sick of living in Bret's shadow, and he wants to prove to the whole world that he is on Bret's level, if not better. So he's issuing the challenge for Bret to step up to the plate and prove him wrong. Which takes us to the final match of the night. It is Bret Hart versus the Brooklyn Brawler. A rare main event sighting for the Brooklyn Brawler in the WWF. I'm sure he appreciated that payout. So, well, I really didn't write a whole lot down about the match. It is amazing to go back and think that even Bret Hart was willing to work hard in a TV main event with the Brooklyn Brawler of all people. But, hey, got to give it to him. Bret's commitment to the business. Never phoning it in, no matter who the opponent was. I did laugh at one point during this match. Vince and Jim were mentioning something about Shawn Michaels, and Corny actually said, and I fucking quote, "I like Shawn. Talked with him several times over coffee." Boy, was that ever a bold-faced lie if I heard it. Was that before or after Corny went to try and throw the coffee in Shawn's eyes? Now, actually, to be fair, maybe 93 was a little before Cornette had his issues with Shawn behind the scenes. Again, we talked about it before. This wasn't exactly peak prick level Shawn. He only got a hothead a couple years later when they finally put the belt on him. Anyway, what else happened here? Oh yeah, speaking of Corny, I enjoyed him taking jabs at Rush Limbaugh being inducted into the 1993 Radio Hall of Fame. And at the point he mentioned the Sally Raphael controversy, Vince totally no-sold it and moved on with the rest of the match. It's a subtle thing. If you don't know what I'm referring to, look it up. It is on the internet. My folks were big Rush Limbaugh listeners when I was growing up. But anyway, Brett won with the sharpshooter. And, well, I figured they were going to have some follow-up with Brett and Owen here, but apparently they're going to save that for a later date. Instead, they literally just sent Brett out there to wrestle a short TV squash, and that was it. No angle, no promo, no nothing. Well, that was underwhelming. As was this episode of Monday Night Raw. What a total nothing happening show. You know, the thing that's funny, what do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squashes in a 45-minute window. And with the exception of the opener between Fatu and the Macho Man, most of them were complete throwaways. We had virtually no promos or angles take place at all. Cornette passively mentioned the Yokozuna Taker match on commentary, but we never actually saw Yoko or Mr. Fuji on screen at any point. This is like watching an episode of Heat from back in the day. A bunch of meaningless squashes. Actually, kind of like watching an episode of AEW Rampage, which I haven't done in quite some time. And there's a reason for that, because that's what this show felt like. Next week, though, we're getting the official rematch between Ludwig Borga and Tatanka, which should be mildly interesting. I remember the first match they had where they basically ended Tatanka's push as we knew it, but seeing as how they did that as a way to write Tatanka out of the Survivor Series match, maybe Tatanka will get his revenge. Or maybe he'll just do the job and Vince will completely lose interest with him. One or the other. Anyway, what do you say we move on to this episode of SmackDown? But do we really want to is the question. Well, for one, they were in my hometown of Pittsburgh. And what better way to make me regret not buying a ticket to go watch that show than opening the show with the same group of motherfuckers that have been starting almost every episode of SmackDown for the last 3 goddamn months. With the Brawling Brutes. How unoriginal can we get? Am I the only one that's starting to generate go-away heat with these guys? Beginning your television show with the same dudes every single fucking week. I mean, am I just missing something here? Are the Brawling Brutes these huge ratings draws that I'm just totally neglecting? Or is it really as simple as the writers are that fucking lazy to where they can never think of a different way to start SmackDown other than using Butch, Ridge, or Sheamus? I guess because Michael Cole's always got to get in his "it's fight night" line. Ridiculous. And people used to complain about the Vince era being repetitive. So anyway, they wrestled the Usos for the undisputed tag titles. And Yeah. Do I really need to go into detail about why I actively boycott Usos matches anymore? Look, the Bloodline's great. I've loved the stuff with Sammy, Roman, and the Usos on camera. The promos are usually the highlights of the shows. It's a very well-told slow burn story. But I'm sorry. Anytime I see Jimmy and Jey Uso wrestle at this point, I just cannot muster up the energy to care. They wrestle one style. I've seen it 100 million times now. They're fine wrestlers. They're good athletes, good workers, but they're an example of how can I miss you when you never go away. And I don't know, maybe if they were wrestling somebody other than the same fucking group of dudes they've been fighting for the last 2 months, I could have maybe tried to get into this thing, but I couldn't. I had it on in the background while I was doing other things. I half-heartedly paid attention here and there. It was pretty much every usual WWE trope you've ever seen in anything involving these guys on television. They did a lot of moves, a lot of spots, 9 million kickouts. It ends up breaking down into the usual ringside brawl like it does every time. Not one single person believed the Usos were going to lose this match, and the match went on way too long. That's all I got. I don't ever want to see these guys touch again, but because I said that, I'll probably have to see them start the next 18 episodes of SmackDown in a row, because I'll get punished for even having mentioned it. So after that, I checked back in to see my hometown hero Kurt Angle show up, because he was kind of the key player on this week's episode. And he was also the birthday boy. So they brought him in for a special appearance, and that was cool. But good God almighty, he had Gable Steveson with him. Now, I know what you're probably thinking right now. Gable who? Well, if you'll remember, going back in the way time machine to, I believe, WrestleMania this past year, they had a random segment on the show where Stephanie introduced Gable Steveson to the WWE fans, factoring in that he was a former Olympic gold medalist, much like Kurt was. I guess they thought that this was somehow going to instantly get the guy over with the fans, and then the reality set in that the guy had the personality of tree bark, and the fans shit all over his debut because it fucking blew chunks. So yeah, that guy's back, apparently. Still at the Performance Center, trying to distinguish a wrist lock from a wristwatch, it would seem. And maybe someday he'll get there. Maybe he too will develop some kind of personality in the next millennia. In the meantime, though, he was just kind of here to... Well, I don't know why he was there. He literally served no purpose. Braun Strowman came in to shake Kurt's hand. He did a little program teaser with Steveson. And that's all I can hope for, that it ends up being as a teaser. And that's all there was to it. Was that segment designed to serve any purpose? If there was a point, I have no idea what it was. But I'll tell you who always has a point when he cuts promos, and his name is L.A. Knight. Yeah.
Let me talk to you.
You're damn right, let me talk to you. I wish you weren't talking about Bray Wyatt, though. It's one of those things where L.A. Knight is supremely talented at talking your butt into a seat, but the message is so preposterous, all you end up doing is shaking your head when it's over. And again, listen, I love L.A. Knight. I knew that guy was a megastar when I watched him as Eli Drake in Impact, and he was great even back then. Big fish in a tremendously small pond. And while I know Bray Wyatt's been involved with a lot of bad shit over the years in terms of booking, I've been a fan of the talent. He's obviously very passionate about what he does, and he really knows how to make you believe that he is his own character, whatever that may be, or however bad it may turn out to be. It's just one of those ill-fated circumstances where all you have to do is look at the track record and you look at all the crap Bray's been involved with. I really want to believe this Uncle Howdy stuff isn't going to be complete bullshit by the end. But judging everything we've seen so far, can you kind of see how it's hard to think anything but that? You know, and the whole mind game thing that's going on with LA Knight continually getting laid out backstage or barricaded underneath gimmicks. First of all, it's completely preposterous because the guy usually comes out none the worse for wear after the fact. Wasn't it last week? I think he was wearing like an arm brace and walking around backstage with a crutch or something. What happened between then and now where now he's perfectly fine? Just walking out there showing absolutely no signs of bodily damage after, 2 weeks? It's ridiculous. And to tie that in with Bray doing his completely incomprehensible verbiage here, it's... Again, I want to like it. I want to like the idea of Bray Wyatt and LA Knight feuding. But it's just one of those things where until I actually see a payoff to it, I'm going to remain cautiously skeptical about anything I see from a creative standpoint. I'm going to expect the worst, and if the whole thing winds up being completely retarded in the end, I'm going to call it out as needed. And I've said before, when it comes to whatever input Bray has into his current character direction, this is not a circumstance where we can blame Vince anymore. He is all hands off when it comes to Bray's creative in WWE now. This is on Bray, this is on Hunter, and it's on whoever is writing this stuff for television. So, for all the shit we wanted to give Vince for how he buried Bray or tried to sabotage his career with the whole Fiend gimmick, this is not a situation where we can blame Vince for the fallout. I know we all want to give the benefit of the doubt, but hear me out. Try to look at history and connect the dots. Again, this is coming from somebody that likes Bray Wyatt. Haven't always been a fan of his booking. It's entirely possible this does not wind up being stupid in the end. But with everything I've seen so far, I don't know. You know, the other problem too, and I'm probably not the first person to mention this, you know, they've been doing all these creepy pre-tapes with Bray for what seemingly feels like forever now. I think I'm ready for something new. They need to get this story moving in a new direction because I'm starting to get bored with it. You know, I know they're trying to save Bray's in-ring debut for a special attraction, and that's all well and good. But they're starting to paint themselves into a corner where the whole thing's just kind of stagnated for so long now. I'm ready to start upping the ante a little bit. They need to start getting Bray involved with something more physical. You know, whatever point they're trying to get with this Uncle Howdy dual split personality gimmick, start going there. Just get to the point with it. Because we're kind of starting to reach a point of diminishing return. Bray was one of the hottest characters when he came back a few months ago, and now he's already just starting to come across as just another guy. And WWE's already got enough of these jags that we so often talk about. Again, it's cool if you want to milk the debut for the Rumble, but at some point, the character needs to evolve into something more than just the prototypical Bray Wyatt cutting nonsensical psychobabble promos that go nowhere. That's all I'm saying. Trying to be as objective as I can. Then we had the two lackeys in Legado del Fantasma wrestling the new and improved heel Viking Raiders. A TV return that I had totally forgotten happened, and that occurred, 3 or 4 weeks ago? I remember when they showed up and they laid out a bunch of geeks at ringside. It was a great return. I just don't remember seeing them do anything since then. So it totally escaped my mind that they were even back. And after seeing everything they did in this segment, now I think I remember why I pretty much forgot about their return. Not only did the match end in a disqualification after a Hit Row ran in, but it was probably one of the worst run-in angles I've seen in the entirety of 2022. First of all, I can never remember anybody's name in that stupid Hit Row group. You know, they were around in NXT for a brief period, and aside from Swerve Strickland, who was easily the best worker in the group, you know, the rest of them were all the fucking shits, especially the big fat guy. None of them could work a lick. They were all completely worthless as wrestlers. They couldn't rap worth a shit. And somehow after they all got fired, Hunter decided that it would be a good call to not only bring them back to television, but to bring them to the main roster. Fucking hell. Braun Breaker's still down in NXT after almost a year and a half, but these slapnuts are on mainstream television botching and fucking up shit left and right? Did you see the spot where the big fat guy tried to slide a chair into the ring and just completely dropped it? Then he had to grab the chair from the other dude in the ring so he could hit Ivar in the back with it? My God. Just a collective waste of human plasma this group is. And no, it's not a racial thing. Go fuck off. They're all just horrible. They suck. Whatever, dude. People love to rave about how great Hunter was and, oh man, he just had such an eye for talent in NXT. All right, dude. Whatever. We can agree to disagree on the whole Hit Row thing. You know, and all of this to accomplish what in the end? Should have been a showcase squash to put over Eric and Ivar, but instead they used it as a TV angle to try and make Hit Row a thing. So that segment got 2 thumbs down from me. As did the contract signing between Gunther and Ricochet ahead of their Intercontinental title match next week. Yeah, there's a total original, never-before-seen segment in wrestling. The contract signing. Never seen before. And I was initially going to skip over it as soon as I thought of the idea of having to hear Ricochet cut a promo. But as soon as that godforsaken New Day music hit, oh, Lord Almighty. It's perfect timing. I just skipped right along through that segment. Went to go take a leak. Now, that's not to say I'm going to skip out on the actual title match. I am going to watch it next week. I'm sure it'll be good. I personally think they kind of rushed into it. You know, they say it's a rematch from, I guess, a match they had way back over the summer or something like that. I mean, they probably could have built to it a little better on television instead of just diving headfirst into it after 2 weeks. But, I mean, they are going to need something to keep viewership up, and Gunther is one of the few people that can probably do that, so we'll see what happens. I also skipped over the impromptu 6-man with the guys because, again, the New Day, just everything about that gimmick is no. Just no. But in completely unrelated news, I think Sami Zayn's going to get a makeover before next week. Trimming up the hair, shaving the beard a little bit, looking presentable for the tribal chief in Chicago. Might not be a bad idea, actually. I love Sami, but, yeah, he's looking a little scraggly. So what else do we have in this abomination of a television show? There was something in the back with Karrion Kross talking with Rey Mysterio about a gimped horse. Or something to that degree. I had no idea what was going on here. Other than the fact that I guess they're going to feud now. For whatever reason, I don't know. I guess because they need something to do. Good old lazy booking. There was also a tag match with the girls that I do not need to elaborate much further on. You know the drill with that one. And to close out the show, we had our Kurt Angle birthday bash celebration, which I think was just their way of saying, fuck it, we're phoning it in on this one. Here's your sports entertainment for the week, and let's go home. Funny because it still ended up being the best part of the show, even though it only went like 5 minutes and change. By the way, I didn't mention about this with Kurt, or I didn't mention this earlier with Kurt, but he looks great physically. He's leaned out a little bit, but he looks less bloated in the face than he did a few years ago. He's gone through cycles over his career where he's looked healthier than others, but he looked pretty damn good here. I don't know if he's like necessarily training for anything, but I mean, he's definitely slimmed out. Good for him. Probably the less stress of having to work that ridiculous schedule that he was doing a while back. So they did the deal earlier where Chad, Gable, and Otis didn't make Kurt's invite list, so they were pretty miffed about that. I know, two grown-ass men complaining that they weren't invited to a birthday party, but whatever. So they came out to crash Kurt's celebration, and Chad Gable actually does a pretty good heat promo on Kurt, basically saying that he lacks intensity, he lost his integrity, and if he had any shred of intelligence left in him, he would turn around and walk out of the ring while Otis eats his birthday cake. And when Gable dropped the line about Otis eating Kurt's cake, I laughed so hard. I have no idea why I found that so funny, but listening to Gable be so upfront about Otis stealing Kurt's birthday cake while Otis is standing behind Gable the whole time looking like a giant fucking meatball in that hideous red formal attire, I mean, it got a pop out of me. Also made me sad when I realized that at one point in time, I would have actually loved to have seen Kurt Angle and Chad Gable work together. Or at the very least, have Kurt kind of work with Gable as like a mouthpiece or a manager with pushing Gable as like a babyface. Could you imagine how great that would have been? Going back and featuring Gable when he was white hot with the crowd. It's kind of hard to remember that, but remember that period where Chad Gable was one of the most over guys in the WWE? Then, of course, they buried him into oblivion, and the rest is history. They made him into Shorty G. There you go. That'll kill a guy's career. So after they kick Kurt out of the ring, the heels are mocking him and basically calling him a loser. So Kurt stops at the top of the ramp and tells him that if they're going to eat that whole cake, they're going to need a lot of milk. And at that point, out comes a 1950s milk truck with Gable Steveson hanging on the side of it. And I think everyone pretty much saw where this was going. And it is a total cartoon segment circa late 90s, because there's Kurt and Gable chucking small plastic milk bottles at Gable and Otis in the ring, and they're just standing there taking it. They could easily just move like 3 feet to their left and get out of the ring, but no, they're just frozen in one spot while they have to take these milk bottle shots to the head. And there were a few times where Otis got fucking plastered right in the side of the head. It's pretty funny. And of course, it all leads to Kurt dragging out the big milk hose, and he starts showering down Otis and Gable in the ring. Yet again, the heel is completely incapable of just moving to the left or moving to the right and getting out of the ring, preventing them from being sprayed. Nope. They were just stoned. They could not move. And while the idea was ludicrous on paper, I will admit, Gable and Otis were fucking fantastic during this thing. It was not as classic as Vince doing the whole swimming motion in the beer when they originally did this angle in 98 or 99, whenever it was. But watching that big tub of goo Otis get sprayed with the milk, and he's taking the overselling flip bumps and bumbling around like an idiot. I mean, I thought it was funny. Stupid, but funny. And again, it was obvious they were reining this one in. It's the time of the year during the holidays where people really aren't watching, so this is usually a down period where WWE is really not trying all that much with their TV product. And it reflected based on what I saw, because this show sucked. A garbage television program this was. You know, I joked about that episode of Retro Raw being a total nothing happening, meaningless 2 hours of wrestling. Actually, that was just 1 hour of wrestling. This was 2 hours. Good Lord, dude. All I can say is I'm glad I didn't waste money to buy a ticket to watch it live. Even to see Gable and Otis get a milk bath in the main event of the show, it still wouldn't have been worth the ticket price. So, I don't know. It was probably the best thing I saw in any of the wrestling segments all weekend, though. But I think that'll be a good time to wrap it up here. I've already done enough venting for the remainder of the year, much less this one episode. This has been a horrible week for wrestling. Again, I didn't even watch the Ring of Honor pay-per-view over the weekend, and I have no intention of doing so. Maybe if I catch wind that the dog collar match with FTR and the Briscoes was worth it, I might buy the replay just to try and do a review of that match, but honestly, is it even worth it? I mean, as good as those teams are, the fact that they basically threw that match together cold on television with 4 days build, it's pretty much all you need to know about it. And even if it is only like $40, it's Christmas season. I'm doing a lot of holiday shopping. I really don't have that kind of disposable income where I can just plunk out an extra $40. And again, I don't think it'd be worth it for just that one match. Maybe I can find an illegal stream of it somewhere, but I don't know. I mean, if anyone saw the match and would recommend that I watch and review it, if you believe that it's worth the price of admission, maybe I'll think about it. But by and large, I'll probably just wind up tapping out with that one. I mean, we'll see how AEW follows up with this coming Wednesday on Dynamite, if at all. And until Friday, thanks for watching all. Take care. Peace out.